Spirit of Christmas. Good God. Hope for the Holidays series, Book 4. Written by Michele Pollock Dalton. Narrated by Rick Barr. Chapter 1. I need bail money. Those were the first words Ruth Merry heard from her estranged son in nearly a year, and the frazzled woman froze. Derek, what's going on? It's a long story. Just wire 10 grand to the courthouse in Traverse City, the frustrated man mumbled. I'll give it back to you the next time I get paid. Turning away from the counter where customers waited to pay for their selections, Ruth waved her daughter over. Can you handle this, honey? Stacy's strawberry blonde curls bobbed as she took over as cashier. Sure, I can refill the candy displays when you get back. The holiday crowds were thinner than usual at the Merry Hollow Tree Farm, but the gift shop still did a robust business on the weekends, and the Saturday following Thanksgiving was their busiest day yet. All right, Derek, you have my full attention, Ruth exclaimed as she moved into the storage area at the back of the shop. Explain yourself. My 5 minutes are almost up, Mother. I don't have the time to get into it. Just send the money, okay? Derek Finseth growled. Alarmed, but resentful of the terse demand, Ruth steeled her nerves. That's not possible, she informed her son with some regret. Not only because you refuse to explain your situation, but also because I don't have that kind of money. Pawn something, mortgage something, anything. Just get me out of here, Derek exclaimed, pummeling the wall near the phone with his fist. Irked by the man's crass insistence, Ruth swallowed a bitter retort. Are they allowing visits? She asked once her temper cooled. Of course not. Everyone's locked down because of this COVID crap. A warning came across the line, which informed Ruth she only had 30 seconds with her son before the call cut off. What kind of trouble are you in, Derek? She whispered. $10,000 is a lot of money. Just some trumped-up possession charges. I've got a buddy who can help straighten things out, but I need to get out of here first, Derek tersely related, his usual charm absent. It wasn't often his mother denied a request, and that threw the angry man for a loop. Furious when the line went dead, Derek pounded the old-fashioned handset against the brick wall and cussed a blue streak. How in the heck was he supposed to post bail if he couldn't talk to the person with the dough? Ruth punched the disconnect button on her cell phone and sagged against a small table. A hot tear slid down her cheek as the upset mother considered her options. Posting Derek's bail wasn't a remote possibility, even if the money was available. Only a fool would believe the wayward man could be trusted to appear in court. Beyond that, Ruth couldn't fathom what type of charges would require such a substantial cash bond. Everything okay? Stacy brightly questioned as she bustled into the storage area. Energetically, she pulled the boxes of handmade candy from the cooler and turned. Mom, hey, what's going on? Is Charlie all right? Feeling like she'd been sucker punched, Ruth straightened and offered a tremulous smile. Despite November's challenges, Ruth still recognized the gift before her, and that, in and of itself, encouraged the worn-out woman. Her daughter's previously guarded expression was now wreathed in the first flush of a new relationship. Ruth turned her palm up and looked at the faded bit of ink she'd added days earlier. The tiny dot represented a mustard seed, the small kernel of hope she needed to live in confidence. Gently, she laid one fingertip over the spot. Faith does not demand miracles, she quietly reminded herself. Faith produces miracles. And, with that thought to encourage her injured spirit, Ruth closed her fist and held tightly to that conviction. Chapter 2. Stacy Whitaker sighed in disgust as she disconnected the call. Meth, she related. The traffic cop caught him with 90 grams, and it sounds like the DA might be after possession with intent to distribute charges. Dropping her head into her open hands, Ruth felt her throat close up as tears battered the back of her eyelids. She'd spent the remainder of the weekend on pins and needles, hoping to hear back from Derek. When more information was not forthcoming, Ruth recruited Stacy to ferret out the ugly truth. "And that means what?" she cried. "The public defender's office said it could carry up to 20 years if Derek was selling the stuff. No one has been assigned to his case yet, so there's still nothing definite to go on," Stacy explained with an edge to her voice. "What a stupid thing to do. Is this what he's been up to for the last year?" Ruth shrugged. "After you and Peter left for Hope Springs last Christmas, Charlie caught Derek out back with a doobie. And after a scuffle, Charlie asked him to leave. I haven't heard from Derek since, and he's only been in touch with Darren a few times." Stacy let out a slow whistle of disbelief. Her twin brothers were like night and day. As the oldest, Darren was a typical firstborn. On the other hand, Derek was mischief and charm wrapped into a big bundle of raw energy. Now what?" Stacy questioned, her analytical mind chasing down the possibilities. "I guess we wait," Ruth sighed in resignation. Ever practical, Stacy offered, "Why don't you hang out here today in case Derek tries calling again? I think I can manage the shop by myself." Lips trembling with suppressed emotion, Ruth nodded. "I'd appreciate that, honey. I need to check on Charlie, too. He's supposed to start physical therapy today, and he's mighty worried that things aren't healed enough." Slipping into her shoes and coat, Stacy prepared to leave. But something stopped her, and she put a hand on Ruth's shoulder. I don't know what to say to make this better, Mom." "Me either," Ruth admitted. "Guess I better talk to Mr. Wonderful about it." A sad smile touched Stacy's mouth. The odd moniker for Jesus was an inside joke between them, and it wasn't that long ago Stacy thought her mother was engaged in an affair with some geriatric Romeo. Still, in the first few days of her relationship with Mr. Wonderful, Stacy found herself utterly enchanted by the Prince of Peace as well. "You do that, Mom, and tell him I said hi." When the back door closed behind her daughter, Ruth laid her head down on the kitchen table. "Please hold my hand," she whispered. "I'm so scared for Derek and what these charges will mean for his life. And I'm so ashamed, God. You gave me a child to raise, and somewhere along the line, I must have failed." As she bundled up that afternoon for an impromptu visit with her husband, Ruth tried to remember something, anything, that would bring peace to her wounded spirit. "Do not let your heart be troubled," she reminded herself. "Do not be afraid." Easier said than done, Ruth grieved. For months, she and Charlie prayed diligently for their family of prodigals. Darren with his agnostic bent, Derek with his self-destructive habits, and Stacy with her prideful determination. And what had their heartfelt pleas accomplished? Ruth's hands still quaked when she considered how close she'd come to losing her daughter a week earlier. With this latest crisis, Ruth shuddered. The weight of Charlie's accident, Stacy's multiple suicide attempts, and Derek's incarceration stole any semblance of serenity from her life. And heaven suddenly seemed very silent. Chapter 3. Ruth poked her spoon into the bowl of chili and then couldn't work up enough energy to care about the activity. Even the grumble of an empty stomach couldn't prod the woman into action. Left bereft by her husband's continued absence, Ruth's heart hung heavy in her chest. Charlie's faith and guidance were an anchor for Ruth in so many ways, but his stint at the rehabilitation center after a fall and subsequent back surgery meant she was alone to face the most challenging days of her life. From a long-ago memory, the words of an Elvis song started to ramble through Ruth's mind. "You'll never walk alone." As she hummed the nearly forgotten words, Ruth's anxiety settled. When her phone began to dance its way across the table, Ruth considered letting the call go to voicemail. However, when she spotted Mary Whitaker's number on the caller ID, Ruth answered. "My goodness, what a surprise! How are you folks in Hope Springs?" Mary's slow chuckle resounded with a soft southern drawl. "Couldn't be better. I got a little miss running around my house keeping things interesting. How's Stacy doing?" Ruth's enormous sigh of relief echoed across the line, and a single tear made a lonely track down her cheek. "She's had a change of heart," Ruth whispered, her grateful amazement still a vibrant reminder of God's goodness. "Well, glory hallelujah!" Mary enthusiastically shouted. "I just knew I needed to give you a call, and my boy is going to be mighty happy to hear that news." Flicking her thumb against her forefinger in a nervous gesture, Ruth quietly asked, "How is Peter? He's been in my thoughts lately." "Ah, that boy's as stubborn as a mule. Can't get him to give an inch." "That's a bit of odd news," Ruth thought. "In what way?" she finally questioned, her mother's heart still concerned for her daughter's ex-husband. "Oh, the ornery cuss just can't see how God can help him along in his troubles. Paul and I have been praying for him like there's no tomorrow, and he's still just clinging to his darn pride." "It's a mother's curse, isn't it?" Ruth questioned, her melancholy sounding loud and clear. "This wanting to save our kids from heartbreak and pain, and still, there's not a single thing we can do to make it better. It's just so frustrating," she murmured. "That's the truth of it," Mary agreed. "I'd give up my own soul if I thought it'd make this hard patch easier for my boy. This waiting on God to move sits like a fire in my chest, and every time I hit my knees, well, I just can't plead with the Almighty enough." "Mary, do you ever wonder what you should have done differently along the way?" Ruth questioned, her anguish cutting all the corners of polite conversation. I just feel like I failed my kids in the worst ways. I didn't have faith to back me up as a young mother, and Silence lingered for several moments as each woman considered all the would've, should've, could've's of life. "I suppose we all get to thinking along those lines here and there," Mary agreed. "When they're young, you're doing your darndest to make sure they're clothed and fed, and when they get older, they run you ragged with all their mischief. It's not like you ever get a moment to just take stock." With a shudder of shame, Ruth lowly said, "My youngest boy was arrested over the weekend on drug charges, and I don't know what to do." "Aw, darling," Mary cried in commiseration. "I'm so sorry to hear that." "Derek wants me to post his bail, but I can't. I just can't," Ruth struggled to say. "It's not about the money, but more about what the whole situation represents. Derek knows what happened to his father. He's old enough to remember what Jack was like when he was strung out." Mary searched her mind for an appropriate comment. Although the women were related by marriage for almost 10 years, their previous conversations remained superficial. "Stacy's never said much about her dad around here. Guess I didn't know about that part of her life." "Your life," Mary corrected. "Oh, she was too young to realize what was happening. The boys, though? They saw Jack's crazy behavior when he was high as a kite. They knew why there weren't always enough groceries, and Darren's always been diligent about staying away from things like that. But Derek? It's like he's forgotten what it was like to wake up with a dead man lying on the living room couch." The gasp elicited from Mary set Ruth's resolve. In humiliation, she'd hidden the past from everyone. But the ugly reality of history set on repeat? Well, it suddenly seemed imperative that the truth be known. "One of Jack's friends overdosed during the night, and everyone at their pill party just ignored it. They let that poor man lay there and die because they didn't want to face the heat," Ruth haltingly explained. "Instead, my 6-year-old son found a lifeless body in that front room, and I simply can't fathom why Derek would take part in something that would remind him of that day." With a hand clasped over her bosom in dismay, Mary could only puff. "That poor boy!" Vigorously, Ruth shook her head in denial. No, he's not a poor boy anymore. Derek is a grown man who decided to sell the same poison that destroyed his childhood. And I'm so mad I could scream. With a whispered prayer for guidance, Mary listened as Ruth continued the fury-filled diatribe. The poor mother's fear and frustration bled over the wires as Mary consoled and shared the other woman's sorrow. Chapter 4. Feeling marginally better after the long talk with Mary Whitaker, Ruth reheated her leftover chili and managed to eat most of it before Stacy returned from the shop. With the Christmas season in full swing, the Merry Hollow Tree Farm required 20-hour days, or so it seemed. Combined with Ruth's frequent visits to Charlie's rehabilitation center, it felt like there weren't enough hours to deal with urgent matters. But having her daughter home to help with the workload eased Ruth's overwrought mind. Thanks for closing up, honey. How did the receipts look? I'm not sure what a usual year would look like in terms of sales, but I'm impressed by the traffic we've seen so far this week, Stacy replied as she wearily plopped into a kitchen chair. And the gift orders are picking up as the Christmas shipping window closes. Charlie will be happy to hear that, Ruth offered with a tenuous smile. Well, for as much as he can hear me anyway. The aide won't open the window for us to talk anymore because of the cold, so I about yelled myself hoarse earlier. I'm sure he's just happy to see you, Mom, Stacy observed as she vacated her chair in search of a quick dinner. Cooking was generally out of Stacy's bailiwick. She and Peter dined out most evenings while they were married. However, her finances no longer supported that kind of lavish living, so Stacy was determined to figure out the whole Rachel Ray thing. Oh, and I'm supposed to tell you the Hawthorne ladies invited us over to make Christmas cookies tomorrow night. Ruth tried to work up some enthusiasm for the idea and failed miserably. The spirit of Christmas held no sway in her heart or her home at the moment. And for the first time in her life, Ruth didn't care. Hey, Earth to Mom, Stacy playfully complained. Do you have a recipe for those filled cookies that Grandma Shipman used to make? I want to see if Lisa can help me get them right. Her mother's recipe box was a well-loved part of Ruth's holiday memories. The old wooden container no longer had a lid that closed, and the simple index cards sported stains and rips, but there was a wealth of family favorites represented in those carefully scrawled directions. Not the raisin ones, Ruth tried to tease. You've never, ever, ever liked those cookies. Stacy rolled her eyes. Okay, you figured it out. I spent the last 30-some-odd years feeding those things to the birds. Now just tell me where you have that recipe stashed, and no one will get hurt. Moving from her brooding spot at the table, Ruth marched toward the stove and shooed her daughter away. No peeking. That's top-secret stuff here, she laughed, a little merriment finally shining forth. When her mother pulled the beat-up relic from the cabinet above the range, Stacy lunged. Gimme! Ruth admonished, playfully wagging a finger. I need to see your security clearance before I can hand over your grandma's trade secrets. Mother, I'm only going to say this once, Stacy threatened. Hand it over, or I'm going to play Father Christmas every waking moment of every day for the next 24 days. In surrender, Ruth presented the recipe box in mock horror. Anything but that, she pleaded. Please just take them all and leave me in blessed peace. Stacy hooted in victory and ran off with her treasure. Mine, all mine, she gleefully cackled as she raced away. Just wait till I tell Lisa. Flabbergasted by the difference 10 days could make, Ruth watched Stacy bounce off. Thank you, God, she whispered. Thank you for giving me my daughter back. But I don't want to lose my sons either. Please reach into their lives and soften Darren and Derek's hearts, Ruth pleaded. Chapter 5. Melody Hawthorne let the guests in and checked her instinct to give them each a hug. Darn pandemic, she thought. It's ruining everything. But Melody settled for a fist bump and led Ruth and Stacy to the warm country kitchen.
Mom did the rosettes already, so we've got something to sample.
With a soothing Christmas playlist of instrumental jazz in the background, the ladies gathered the necessary supplies for their baking blitz.
I'm making Daniel's favorite,
Melody insisted when Lisa suggested they pare down the list of choices.
Just because he's gone,
the teenager stuttered, then Melody dropped her head.
I still need to remember him, Mom, even if you and Dad don't.
Moisture filled Lisa's eyes, and she turned away. In that moment, Ruth was reminded that her Christmas wasn't the only one dimmed by family tragedy. The Hawthorns' oldest child, Daniel, committed suicide earlier in the year, and the family's hearts were surely as distressed as her own. With a tender touch, Ruth lent her support to the grieving mother. There were no words of comfort to offer, just silent support that acknowledged the painful reality. Stacy watched the older women move away, unified in their grief, and her soul shuddered.
I never really thought what it would mean, you know?
She softly commented to Melody.
I didn't care what would happen to the people I loved. The only thing I could think of was ending my own pain.
Stacy acknowledged, her recent brush with self-annihilation a haunting memory. Focused on measuring the butter and brown sugar, Melody tuned out Stacy's apology. The teenager was tired of the excuses and paltry justifications.
Why can't we celebrate the one good thing we have going this year? She grumbled. Christmas isn't canceled just because bad stuff happens. Daniel died. He didn't disappear. I still remember him. I still love him.
Unused to children in general, Stacy was utterly confused by the adolescent's mood swing. Moving to the island, Melody forcefully laid out the saltine crackers that formed the foundation for the peculiar toffee affectionately known as Christmas crack. As she thunked around the kitchen, Melody complained,
Everyone always tells me to grow up. Well, I think it's time you all do the same. We don't observe Christmas because it's a chance to party or pig out. The whole reason it's a big deal is still the same.
Wide-eyed, Stacy adroitly stepped out of the girl's way and let the rant play out.
God is still good, even if the rest of the world isn't. Jesus still showed up, even though we're nothing but selfish babies who take everything for granted.
Melody yelled loud enough for her mother to hear.
And I am not going to forget why we celebrate.
The oldest Hawthorne girl, Monique, poked her head into the kitchen.
Geez, keep it down, runt. I'm watching a makeup tutorial, and I can't hear a darn thing.
Melody stuck her tongue out at her sister and blithely mentioned,
It's not going to make a difference one way or another. You'll still look like something off Salvador Dali's scrap heap.
Yikes! For a little thing, you fight mean, Stacy stammered.
I think maybe we can be friends after all, she said, lifting her hand for a high five.
Eyeing the odd lady, Melody cocked her head and growled.
Are you making fun of me too?
Rapidly, Stacy shook her head and held up both hands in a gesture of submission.
No, just saying us vertically challenged folks need to stick together.
When the girl's jaw snapped shut, Stacy leaned in and quietly explained.
My older brothers get kicked in the shin whenever they call me a People McNugget. I may be small, but I'm mighty.
Melody's face crinkled up, and then she howled with laughter.
As long as you're not going to be a Grinch, we can be friends, the girl decided.
Holding up one finger, Stacy drew herself up into a stoic pose and recited.
Ah, well, in Whoville, they say, the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day.
The cheerful woman grinned.
I'm not sure it's healthy for a heart to do that, but I know what it feels like to have all the dark shadows swept out and joy flood into its place. So it's probably safe to say I'm good friend material now.
Chapter 6. Stella Boone laid out her materials on her assigned workbench in the heated barn and took stock of the inventory Ruth required. "Gonna be a busy day," she commented, holding up the list for the 2 other employees to see.
Plenty of wreaths still needed for the commercial lots. For Stella, making the cross-shaped wreaths was a labor of love. Although they were requested less than their traditional evergreen counterparts, the beautiful reminders carried Christmas's true meaning in their branches. From Bethlehem's manger to Calvary's hill, she whispered to the red velvet ribbons that covered her workspace. What's that? Ruth brusquely questioned as she hurried into the barn with Stacy on her heels. Just commenting on the perfect tree, Stella answered with a serene smile brightening her face. Ugh, we live on a Christmas tree farm, and we still don't have a tree at our house, Stacy reminded, giving her mother a subtle nudge on the shoulder. Where do I go to file a complaint with management? To Stacy's delight, the industrious wreath makers laughed and genially offered their suggestions. I'll take it up with the owner, the vivacious woman proclaimed, much to her mother's chagrin. So where do I find the perfect tree, Mom? You got one hiding in a VIP section on the back 40 somewhere? Ruth had the good grace to blush. Leaning in, she shushed her sassy child and muttered under her breath, It's in the attic. No, that's sacrilege, Stacy cried in counterfeit horror. Missing the gorgeous 12-foot silk spruce she put up every year, Stacy unexpectedly felt homesick for the soaring windows in her great room and the fieldstone fireplace Peter built. They were the perfect backdrop for Christmas decorating. Mother, I want a real tree this year. No more bogus pieces of plastic. Whirling, she pinned the wreath maker with a questioning look. Did you have one in mind? A perfect tree? Chuckling, Stella lifted a calming hand. I was referring to the cross, young lady. It was the tree that offered the most extraordinary gift of all. Deflated, Stacy's face scrunched as she considered the odd woman's statement. Then understanding took hold, and Stacy's eyes lit with anticipation. Oh, that gives me an idea, she blurted before she rushed away in an excited dither. Astonished by Stacy's sudden departure, Ruth watched her daughter go with a tinge of envy. That flood of joy that accompanied Stacy's redemption overflowed into every area of her life at the moment. The change was as staggering as it was swift. Did you need something, Mrs. Merry? Stella prompted after the whirlwind escaped and calm returned to the festive workshop. I wondered what might be left over for Garland. I thought it might perk Charlie up if I decorated the exterior of his window with some greenery and bows, Ruth haltingly explained to her employees. What a fabulous idea, Stella encouraged. She'd provided her wreath-tying skills to the Merry Hollow Christmas tree farm for nearly 2 decades, and Stella considered Charlie Merry a friend. The other ladies and I have been practicing some Christmas carols. We thought we might head over there tonight and perk up his spirits. We'll make it a decorating party as well. Sweet relief flooded Ruth's soul. The kindness of her friends and neighbors offered a balm to the fierce ache in her troubled life. That would be, so wonderful, Ruth stammered. I can't carry a tune in a bucket, but I'm sure Charlie would love to see some familiar faces. Don't mind us. You sing anyway, one of the other women offered. A spirit of praise is the magic elixir of hope. You just lift that voice and let it be heard, Mrs. Merry. Ruth offered a self-derisive chuckle. You might quickly change your mind once you hear my caterwauling.
Chapter 7. The lively group converged at the rehabilitation center as the shadows began to lengthen that evening. Despite the snow, the 4 women diligently trudged through the cold with their festive decorations in tow.
Joy to the world, Stella belted out along with the others as they arranged the evergreen garland and velvety bows. Relishing her husband's thrilled smile, Ruth waved in greeting. Their continued separation sent twinges of dismay into Ruth's clamoring mind. The nightly phone calls and odd visits through a closed window only amplified Ruth's discontent, and she wished that there was a way for Charlie to recuperate from his fall in their own home. But their health insurance coverage was already stressed to the max. Hey there, we can't hear you, Stella cheerfully admonished the crestfallen lady. Releasing a pent-up sigh, Ruth softly commented, "I just miss him so much. Guess I don't feel much like singing when I'd rather be inside holding Charlie's hand." "A little holiday cheer will go a long way when you're feeling low," Stella encouraged. "And when you're feeling down, don't forget it's called a sacrifice of praise for a reason." Slowly, Ruth withdrew from the window and stepped out of Charlie's line of sight. "That seems incongruous." Stella quirked a heavily drawn eyebrow and gave a subtle shrug. "I guess it does, but it doesn't take anything to praise God when you're feeling generous because of His blessings," she observed. "On the other hand, when circumstances scream that He's forgotten us, when we can't see His goodness, well, praising God in those times requires a personal sacrifice." "That doesn't seem possible, not with everything that's going on right now," Ruth uttered, her melancholy apparent. "Don't let your faith disappear, dear. God is still good, and He can be trusted in all of life's storms," Stella softly consoled. "A true sacrifice of praise comes from a humble heart that chooses to honor God despite what life throws at you. It isn't meant to be a job performance rating for God." Stung by the gently issued assessment, Ruth blanched. "It's not that. I'm not in the mood for all the season's festivities." "I understand. I truly do," the elderly woman confided. "This should be a time of great joy, but so many struggle with the winter blues, myself included. With the state of the world as it is hard to find any sense of peace or hope. Just let me encourage you to try this avenue of renewal." As they finished the small bit of decorating, Ruth strained to add her voice to the spirited Christmas carols, and when she spotted several other lonely residents peeking through their curtains, Ruth realized that the impromptu caroling expedition added a tiny bit of cheer into their gloomy world of isolation and fear as well. "Thank you," she offered when their task was complete. "This was a fabulous idea, ladies, and I'm so glad you thought of it." Trudy Botsford paused and gazed around the courtyard. More than a dozen windows faced the small horseshoe of land. Turning to her co-workers, she raised arthritic fingers that were stiff from the cold and a day's work. "I think I've got a little life left in these hands. What do you say we head back to the barn and see what we can cobble together for some of the other windows here?" "More garland?" Ruth questioned in surprise. It would take time to tie enough of the fragrant decoration. "If we do every other window on each side, then everyone should be able to look out of their window and see something," Trudy suggested. "Like a checkerboard," Stella commented, envisioning the overall effect. "That would work, and we could put a tree in the center of the courtyard for something extra." Feeling lighter, Ruth clapped her hands together. "I like that suggestion. We'll bring one of Charlie's trees in a planter so he can appreciate it all day long." Leaning in close, Stella patted Ruth's back. "Bringing solace to others always comforts my heart, too." Chapter 8. "It's half the time," Ruth wheedled. "Mother, it's 4 hours each way. That's an entire day wasted on travel to a court hearing that might take 10 minutes, Darren argued. "Derek made this mess, and he's going to have to be man enough to clean it up on his own." "He's your brother," Ruth sharply reminded her oldest son. The trip to Traverse City would require either air travel or an overnight stay for her, but Darren was much closer. "And he needs to know that we still care for him." "Listen to me, Mom. Derek made choices, and now he's got to face the consequences. I'm not taking time away from work and my family to babysit him. I'm sorry that upsets you, but that's just the way it has to be." Darren sighed. "We're not traveling for Christmas either. It's just not safe." Ruth was shaking by the time she disconnected the call. A vision of disaster loomed large in her thoughts, and it wasn't limited to the destructive nature of a worldwide pandemic or the subsequent fallout for millions of people. There was an insidious atmosphere of fear that lingered in every person she met. The fiery holocaust of liberty, aggravated by social agendas, shook the very foundations of family life. And Ruth was utterly debilitated by the chaos and trauma that ensued. "Mr. Wonderful, I simply cannot fathom where this road leads, and I'm scared. It's completely beyond my ability to change a single circumstance, which frustrates me to no end," Ruth mourned. "I'm so thankful for Stacy's transformation. I can't even begin to express my gratefulness. But I miss Charlie. I miss life." Ruth heaved out a strangled sob. "You seem so far away, God. I can't see you or hear you through all of this other noise. And I miss you, too." With the impromptu prayer complete, a look at the clock informed Ruth that she was late, a situation which made the crabby woman grit her teeth. "Stacy, hurry up. We've got to go, or we won't have time to stock the bakery case before the shop opens." Later that afternoon, Ruth stopped long enough for a quick lunch break in the back room, and while she ate, the harried lady sorted through her email and other digital notifications. The daily devotion that arrived in her inbox reminded, "He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless." Halting mid-bite, Ruth reread the verse from Isaiah. Powerless? Without a doubt, that was precisely how she felt. Reading further, several phrases pierced Ruth's ragged soul. "When you come to the end of yourself, then you are right where God can use you," one paragraph proclaimed. But it was the last statement that resounded in Ruth's ears the rest of the day. "When you are broken and empty, then you are in the perfect position to claim God's grace. Grace that is sufficient to offset every bit of your weakness." "Charlie, Derek, Stacy, Darren," Ruth's inner voice shouted the rest of the day, each name becoming a one-word prayer that would not die. Fervently, the litany continued as she stocked shelves, waited on customers, and filled gift orders. "Please, God," she begged under her breath, "take care of my family." "Hey, Mom, are you listening?" Stacy grumbled as they closed up for the day. "I grabbed a nice little balsam fir off the back of the truck this afternoon. Want to help me decorate it tonight?" "Wait, what?" Ruth reconnoitered. "Which truck? We don't want one of the commercial lots to be short on their inventory." "Easy, crazy lady. I adjusted the invoice, and the Boy Scouts aren't going to miss one tree," Stacy pointed out, her voice filled with subtle reassurance. "I even bought the stuff for your special hot chocolate while I was at the supercenter yesterday." While the idea of Christmas decorating generally added joy to the holiday, in Ruth's ragged emotional state, she couldn't work up much enthusiasm for the chore. "Sure, honey," she glumly agreed for the sake of her daughter. The scent of fresh pine filled the house that evening, along with the sweet smell of melted chocolate and marshmallows. Eager to recreate the vivid memories of childhood, Stacy dusted off the ancient stereo system and loaded the turntable with several records. During their decorating marathon, Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, and Elvis Presley all took turns singing White Christmas. But the festive mood changed when the king of rock and roll returned with Blue Christmas, and Ruth's eyes began to sting. "Missing Charlie?" Stacy softly questioned. Ruth nodded in miserable acknowledgement. "We've only had a few Christmases together, but the idea of spending this one without him? It's left a hole where all the good feelings used to be." "I've been thinking of Peter, too," the younger woman admitted. "We didn't make many traditions of our own, but when I reminisce, I only remember the good times, the parties and the crazy gifts we picked out for each other." Stacy exhaled, letting go of the building disappointment. "I thought we'd be celebrating in New York this year. I already had my dress picked out for New Year's Eve, and I imagined we'd be standing in Times Square when the ball dropped at midnight." Vision blurring, Stacy quietly moaned. "It's gonna get better, right? This missing all the bits and pieces of the life we used to know? I don't know, honey. I just don't know.
Chapter 9. The crazy crowd of Saturday shoppers was already in full swing by the time Lisa Hawthorne and her daughters arrived at the quaint gift shop.
Where do you want us, Stacy?
Looking up from the nearly empty bakery case, Stacy waved the trio over.
If Melody and Monique want to take over here, I'll work on the gift baskets. And Mom will likely need your help with the reservations. Santa is already frazzled. And we're behind on the sleigh rides for the chop-your-own-tree groups.
Lisa nodded in assent and offered.
Jeff will be here shortly. He had a few appointments this morning, but he's bringing the tractor and hay wagon again, along with the last of our honey and maple syrup stock.
Thank goodness, Stacy moaned.
With less than 2 weeks to go, I'm starting to wonder if I'll survive the retail madness of the holiday season. Filling online orders is a full-time job. You've done an excellent job of restructuring the shop, Lisa praised. So many businesses are closing their doors because they can't figure out how to adapt to all the new regulations and limitations. But your ideas have made the tree farm viable despite it all.
Flushing, Stacy accepted the praise with a flare of her old pride.
It's what I do best, she agreed, handing over the basket of individually wrapped cookies. These are for the kids visiting Santa today. It should be good PR for the cafe.
Lisa accepted the treats and gave a wink.
See? This is what I mean, Stacy. You really should consider doing some consulting work for other companies in the area. Help them figure out ways they can keep their doors open.
I'm beat, Ruth moaned as she sank into a chair. The cafe corner was finally empty. The overdone ho 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 of the jolly old elf faded into oblivion, and the carols that cycled on repeat through the overhead speakers were blessedly silent.
I think half the county showed up today for hot apple cider, kettle corn, and fresh donuts,
the tired proprietor groaned, amazed that the last-minute event drew such a crowd.
The wreath-tying demonstrations and outdoor stalls seem to be a good draw, Stacy answered with a Cheshire cat grin. Told you so. Wait till I talk to Charlie tonight. He's going to be ecstatic, Ruth celebrated. And I can't thank you enough, honey. Charlie's been so discouraged. He's missing his favorite time of year. So I'm positive he will want a full rundown on your outdoor market.
Tapping a finger against her chin, Stacy spitballed.
It's too bad Paul isn't around.
Her ex-father-in-law's sheds gave Stacy an idea.
I'd have him build several stalls that we could use as a type of Christkindl market for the season.
Quickly, Stacy pulled the phone from her pocket and dialed.
Hey, Paul, it's Stacy, and I'm wondering about something.
The enthusiastic woman went quiet, and the color faded from her face.
Oh, no. Will they be all right?
Startled by the anxiety in her daughter's voice, Ruth reached out and clasped Stacy's hand.
What is it, honey?
She asked when the call ended.
Mary and Peter were injured in an accident yesterday afternoon, Stacy stammered. Mary is home now, but Peter's still in the hospital. They had to repair 2 fractures in his leg.
Ruth watched her child closely. Until now, Stacy's feelings toward her ex-husband tended to cant toward exasperation. But for the moment, Stacy's remorse carried far more impetus than her anger.
He'll be okay then?
Head whipping up, Stacy blinked.
What? Oh, yes, he should be. I mean, why wouldn't he? It's just a couple of pins and plates to hold things together. People recover from that kind of surgery. But it still bothers you?
Ruth asked knowingly. Releasing a pent-up breath, Stacy stared blindly at the large picture window.
Yeah, she lowly admitted. I'm mad at Peter most of the time for ruining my dreams, but I never wanted anything bad to happen to him.
Chapter 10.
Stella and Trudy lifted the strands of mixed garland from their trunks with happy grins. Each wore a festive red and green elf hat to commemorate the occasion. "We found enough," they happily called to Ruth as she approached. The Sunday afternoon sunshine heralded a welcome all its own as the group assembled the baubles and bows needed to effect their Christmas monkey business. So as they marched into the courtyard, there was enough playful banter and noise to attract attention. Fueled by the camaraderie, Ruth's smile deepened into something genuine. "Little is much when God is in it," she heard one of the other women say, and Ruth considered her own experiences. Nothing had ever been quite as joyful as those early Christmases with her children. Even when there were only a few cheap gifts under the tree during those lean years, the jubilant faces stretched in awe and anticipation. "This little light of mine," Trudy happily trilled, "I'm gonna let it shine." A nearly inaudible voice joined the song from inside, and Ruth pivoted to find the source. Curtains slowly parted as the draperies were tediously drawn open, and a tiny white-haired woman grinned at the mischief makers. When the elderly lady cracked open her window, Ruth approached. "Would you mind if we decorated your window sill?" "Not in the least," the resident wheezed. "It'll give me something to look at besides these four walls." Ruth's co-conspirators snagged cookies from the tray she offered and gave satisfied sighs when the rich, dark brew of the hazelnut coffee splashed into their oversized mugs. "You seem in brighter spirits today," Stella observed as they chatted about their afternoon adventures. Uncertain about her answer, Ruth gave a casual nod and considered the gratification of a job well done. The residents of Charlie's rehabilitation facility appreciated their efforts to bring holiday cheer to their glum existence, and Ruth found a sense of satisfaction in that. "Helping others seems to take my mind off some of my own concerns." After munching down the last bite of her cherry blink cookie, Trudy grinned. "Ain't that just the way of it? Whenever I'm missing my kids and grandkids, I find one of the young mothers in the parish to spell for a little while so they can have a break." Grateful for the lively diversion, Ruth laughed and compared mom stories with the others. But the heartache that lingered just beneath the merriment leached out into the conversation. "It's so hard to watch them grow up and grow away," she softly commented during a lull. Stella confirmed the sentiment. "But I find comfort in something Ruth Bell Graham said. As a mother, my job is to take care of the possible." "And trust God with the impossible," Trudy finished the quote. "That's one I've heard before, too. And boy, when you've got to sit back and watch them falter and fall, there isn't anything harder." "I know all about the impossible, and it breaks me," Ruth softly admitted. "My heart grieves with my kids as they go through the hard times. But more than that, I wonder what I should have done differently for them. There is such an overwhelming sense of failure sometimes that I can barely lift my head." "It's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? That abiding love," Trudy quietly observed. "It doesn't fade as your children age, and I know we all celebrate in their successes, but it certainly leaves a wound when those same babies that used to cling can't even be troubled to call. Or when they only remember who you are when they need to be bailed out of the messes they've made," Ruth solemnly added. Chapter 11. "You've been really quiet, Mom," Stacy observed at dinner the next night. "What's going on with you?" Gnawing at a tough bit of pot roast, Ruth delayed her answer until the piece of shoe leather cleared her windpipe. After a long drink to wash away the lingering taste of charred meat and unwashed potatoes, Ruth muttered, "Just trying to keep my head up." Stacy stabbed at one of the undercooked carrots on her plate and launched the orange missile into the stratosphere. "Geez," she complained when the ornery vegetable pinged off the overhead light. "I followed the recipe exactly. What happened?" Ruth couldn't begin to hazard a guess. The culinary disaster, served on her best china,
challenged Ruth's gag reflex with every bite. Guess it's been a while since home economics class, huh? She cautiously questioned. Home ec? I hated that class, Stacy grumbled. Well, except for the part where we planned our household budget. That part was okay. How do you feel about popcorn and a movie? Ruth tentatively suggested. We can watch How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Mom, you hate that movie. No offense, honey, but I think I hate pot roast more, Ruth teased with a wink. Besides, I'm feeling all sorts of grinchy myself these days. I think I can finally relate to that green fellow. Stacy launched herself away from the table with a happy snap of her fingers and began to clear away the evidence of the dismal meal. Halting in mid-stride, Stacy swirled. Wait, is it still my night to cook? No, Ruth playfully howled. I'll make the popcorn. Oh, thank goodness, Stacy retorted. Because I have absolutely no clue what to do with popcorn if it doesn't come in a microwavable bag. "11 days and counting," Ruth sighed. "I don't know how I would have managed the business without Stacy, but Christmas isn't the same without you here." Charlie blew out a breath and cringed when the movement pulled the muscles in his back tight. "How's she coming along?" The house was silent around her, but Ruth still got up and made sure the bedroom door was closed before she continued. "The change in Stacy is obvious in several ways, but there are moments when the fallout from this past year still overwhelm her. I'm just so glad to see her smile again." "But?" Charlie prompted. "Darren and Derek," Ruth whispered. "I can't bear the thought of where their lives are headed if they choose to ignore the obvious." "Angel, don't give up. Remember, there's someone who loves them even more than you do." Ruth sniffed back the tears. I know, she dejectedly answered. "But it's so hard to wait, and to watch their lives fall apart. There isn't anything I wouldn't do to protect them from the pain. But I can't even get Derek to respond to a letter, Brownie." The pet name made Charlie smile. In the beginning, the moniker was a testament to his resemblance to a particular character created by Charles Schulz. But as the relationship with Ruth developed into something sweet, the name was shortened. "I know it's off topic, but did you watch the Charlie Brown Christmas special this year?" No," Ruth grumbled, chagrined at the abrupt change in the conversation. "Find a way to watch it, Angel, and listen closely when that goofy bald kid asks, 'Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?'" Chapter 12. "I think there must be something wrong with me, Linus," the animated character said. "Christmas is coming, but I'm not happy. I don't feel the way I'm supposed to feel." Stacy rolled her eyes. "Mother, are you watching that again?" Flushing, Ruth hit pause and waited for her daughter to plop onto the couch beside her. "Better than you dancing around to that goofy song you've been playing nonstop for the past 2 weeks. I thought I bought you off with Grandma Shipman's cookie recipe," Ruth lightheartedly accused. "Hey, the Kinks make great music," Stacy teased, standing up to shimmy her backside a little. "Charlie wanted me to watch this. For some reason, he thinks I'll find the answer to all my questions in a 55-year-old Christmas cartoon." Mom, you do know they have Charlie on heavy painkillers right now, don't you? I'm not sure he's a reputable source of information at the moment." Ruth sloshed the last of her hot chocolate around the bottom of her mug and drew the Afghan tighter around her legs. "That may be, but my man has a heart for people, and Charlie knows me better than anyone else in the world. It's like he can feel my pain, even across the miles that separate us." "You're one of the lucky ones. Not everyone finds that kind of love in this world," Stacy softly commented, lamenting her own situation. "Have you heard from Peter?" Ruth gently queried. "No. We parted on pretty hard terms,
But Mary sent me a text yesterday saying he's staying at their place after leaving the hospital, Stacy explained. Guess he's planning to sell the house, she harumphed. Can't figure out why Peter's willing to give it all up now when he wouldn't do it for me a year ago. I've watched it several times, Brownie, and nothing is clicking, Ruth shared with her husband later that evening.
5 words, Angel. That's all you need to focus on. Just 5 words. Good tidings of great joy. That's the spirit of Christmas in a nutshell, Charlie explained. We focus on the baby in the manger and tend to forget the purpose of his nativity. Jesus came to set people free from the miserable things that bind them. So if you can't remember anything else, then center your thoughts on that, Angel. You're no longer a slave to despair and uncertainty. You have your freedom. Christmas is a spiritual Independence Day that will never be revoked, not by governors or mayors or anyone else. Guilt gnawed at Ruth's stomach. Her problem seemed small compared to her husband's situation, yet she drew comfort from Charlie's staunch faith. Giving herself an internal shake, Ruth concentrated on her mate's well-being.
I'm sorry for burdening you with this, Charlie. You need all of your energy to heal. Please don't worry about things here. I'll figure it out sooner or later, she softly reassured.
The lancing pain in his back paled in comparison to the emotional distress that plagued every lucid moment. But despite all of the hardships, Charlie knew without a shadow of a doubt God was still present in every detail. Have you been handing these worries over to the one who can take care of them? He softly questioned. Because that's all you can do, Angel. If you're doing what is possible, then leave the impossible to the only one who can work all this out for good.
But what if he won't?
Ruth hoarsely questioned around the tears that clogged her throat.
What if God refuses to answer my prayers the way I want him to, Brownie?
Charlie solemnly considered the plea. What if was a sentence that entered his thought life more than it should. What if his back never healed? What if he was unable to work his land again? Who would take care of the business he spent a lifetime building? How would he survive in the grim landscape of a long-term care facility if going home was no longer a possibility? Those were the thoughts that swirled like a maelstrom as Charlie answered. Even if we can't see the way forward, we still have to trust in God's goodness, Ruth. Remember the ways he's provided and answered in the past, and believe that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things you can't yet see. Chapter 13. Famished and exhausted, Ruth closed the till for the last time and sighed in relief.
My dogs are barking, she groused as Stacy wilted into a chair. Is it always like this?
The younger woman tiredly questioned. Ruth shrugged and tucked the bank bag along with the day's receipts in her purse.
You forget this is only my 3rd season, but since it is the last weekend before Christmas, I'm guessing we're on the tail end of the holiday crazies.
Thank goodness. The stockroom is almost bare, Stacy mumbled through a yawn.
And just to be perfectly clear, you're on your own next year. I won't be doing retail ever again.
Ruth's weary chuckle was flat, but she plopped down beside her daughter with a grin that teased the corners of her mouth.
I seem to remember Charlie echoing that sentiment each year during the mad shopping dash right before the big day. What do you say to an easy dinner? I hear the pizzeria in town is open for takeout. As long as I can get an order of cheesy bread and a side of buffalo wings, you can count me in. I'll call it in and finish closing up if you want to run into town and pick the order up,
Ruth suggested. Stacy tucked the flyaway hair behind her ears and grumbled.
If we weren't talking gooey cheese and pepperoni goodness, I'd flat out decline. But it's my night to cook, and I don't think your smoke alarm can handle another round of my baking. So I guess I'll go.
Propped up in recliners 45 minutes later, the woman scarfed down slices, chugged diet soda, and watched Jack Skellington dance around Christmas Town.
The unusual holiday classic prompted Ruth to tease. "You kids have always had the strangest taste in entertainment." "Eureka!" Stacy giggled. "Do you remember Derek running around the house shouting that?" Ruth rolled her eyes. "Oh, how could I forget? Every time he opened the refrigerator, a door, a cereal box, Eureka!" The wave of nostalgia surrendered to sadness, and Ruth sniffled. "Still no word?" Stacy quietly inquired, suddenly sensitive to her mother's distress. Tucking the Afghan more tightly around her legs before answering, Ruth swallowed past the lump in her throat. "I found a small write-up in the Traverse City online paper, but there wasn't any new information." The pair lapsed into silence as the Pumpkin King marched across their television screen. Bleary-eyed, Ruth cracked open one eyelid to peek at the strange glow which suffused her living room. The blue screen of the TV reflected peculiar, dancing shadows in the otherwise darkened room. With her daughter snoring softly at the other end of the sofa, Ruth struggled to understand her odd sense of alarm. The baffled woman looked toward the fireplace, the expected source of wood smoke, yet the hearth was empty. Fumbling for the remote that returned the incliner to a seated position, Ruth's mind slowly engaged as her body came awake. Faculties on high alert, dread surged through Ruth's stomach, and the frightened woman haltingly turned her head toward the picture window behind the sofa. A hand flew to Ruth's mouth, but there was little time to quell the physical response to her fear. Vomit spewed through her fingers and showered everything nearby. "Ha!" Stacy shrieked as she woke to the vile spray across her face. Brushing away the regurgitated chunks of pepperoni pizza, Stacy began to gag. Then the blossom of color that painted her mother with an eerie orange light registered. Leaping from her seat, the curvy woman hurdled the displaced coffee table and rushed toward the kitchen. Grabbing her cell phone from the counter, Stacy hastily dialed 911. "Fire! We have a fire!" Chapter 14. Frozen ruts created by the heavy equipment quickly filled with snow as a wintry mix pelted stunned observers. Skirting frozen puddles created by the runoff, a local photographer wove his way through smoldering debris as he tried to document the disheartening scene. Tear tracks carved a path over Ruth's soot-smudged cheeks as the last of the fire crews packed up. Sunrise had revealed the charred ruins of the gift shop, and the bone-weary woman shook from the cold chill of despair that cloaked her spirit. Overnight, brisk winds had carried embers to the house, the heated barn, the storage shed, and several plots of young trees, and the catastrophic damage to the Merry Hollow tree farm was the embodiment of a nightmare before Christmas. Although heavy snow cover saved some areas from substantial damage, Ruth couldn't see past the devastation. More startling was the crude graffiti that adorned several pieces of the corrugated metal siding firemen hacked away from the damaged outbuildings. "Mrs. Merry? Ma'am?" the fire chief questioned as he waved a hand for Ruth's attention. "Ma'am, do you have someone who can help tarp that roof?" He tried again. Ruth blinked and focused her gaze on the concerned man. "I'm sorry. I have no idea how to break this to my husband," she whispered with a gesture toward the chaotic melee of service personnel and gawkers. "I understand, but there's a lot to be thankful for. The unexpected snow kept the blaze from spreading, and if you can get someone to help you with that roof, the rest of the structure is safe, so you won't be displaced." Stacy released a pent-up breath and slid an arm around her mother's waist. "It's going to be okay, Mom. The insurance adjuster is already on the way, and we'll figure the rest out." "Why?" Ruth softly grieved as she wearily laid her head against Stacy's shoulder. "I just can't take any more," she whimpered. When Lisa Hawthorne broke through the crowd of onlookers, her dismayed glance took in the destruction, but her eyes landed on the huddled pair of women. "Oh, Ruth, what happened?" "Arson," Stacy growled under her breath. Even the permeating stench of smoke and rancid vomit on her clothes couldn't hide the telltale smell of accelerant. Someone did this on purpose. The feisty woman snarled in outrage. Early Monday morning, Stacy called suppliers and assured them that they would be compensated for lost inventory. But their selling season was officially over. With that odious task out of the way, she sank onto the sofa next to her mother. "Find anything?" Ruth blinked away the moisture in her eyes and closed the book in her lap. "When I flipped the Bible open, I landed in the book of Matthew, and I only managed to read one verse." She softly answered, a tremulous sigh escaping. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Hard-pressed to accept such a pat answer, Stacy gathered her mother's hands together and clasped them between her own. "I thought Mr. Wonderful was supposed to protect us from stuff like this, Mom. Are we being punished for something?" Head bowed under the weight of her distress, Ruth pressed a hand to her chest as if that would banish the ache. Her heart cried out for relief, and the distraught woman cracked. "I don't know. I just don't know anything anymore." Chapter 15. Stella laid a gentle hand on her employer's arm and softly consoled. "God is good, all the time, without fail." "I don't know if I believe that anymore," Ruth hoarsely admitted. The outpouring of sympathy in the days leading up to Christmas humbled the broken woman, yet the absence of answers in the face of overwhelming odds clouded her mind with doubt and worry. Pointing to a chair, Stella urged her guest to sit. Subdued, the elderly lady began to share. "My youngest son was born a brittle diabetic, and by the time he was 2, the disease began to ravage his eyes. As his vision dimmed, Carl would whimper whenever he could not distinguish my form nearby." Ruth blinked rapidly to clear her eyes and sat up straighter, her attention fixed on Stella's hushed recitation. "Shortly after his 3rd birthday, the retinopathy stole what was left of Carl's sight, and when he would cry out in the middle of the night, I would rush to his side. I would climb into the crib with him, stroke his hair, and comfort him with a gentle touch. One night, after he'd fallen into a fitful sleep, I moved my hand away so I wouldn't disturb him. I stayed there, just inches away, but Carl startled awake and began to sob. He couldn't see me there right next to him, and I'm sure he was afraid that I'd left him alone in the darkness." "Oh, Stella," Ruth mourned. "How awful that must have been for both of you." A worn blue gaze searched her employer's stunned expression. Closing her eyes, Stella recalled her boy's face and the terror reflected in his blank stare before she continued. "His suffering, his inability to see, prevented Carl from sensing my presence, Ruth. I was right there, face to face with him. My breath was on his cheek, and my embrace only half a second away." The elderly lady paused and looked up. "Do you understand what I'm saying, Mrs. Merry?" Ruth cocked her head. There was a meaning to the story? No, not really." "So often, our pain blinds us to God's presence. When we are hurting and uncertain, we think He is absent or that He's left us to deal with everything alone. But He promised never to leave us or forsake us. He's right next to us, a hair's breadth away, just waiting to comfort us and let us know that we are still safe in His care. And I can promise you, God always attends to the cries of His children." Shifting uncomfortably, Ruth looked away. "My cries don't seem to do much good," she slowly and lowly admitted. "I feel like such a fraud, but my faith just isn't big enough to cover everything," Ruth acknowledged with an unconscious wave of her hand. Then the stymied woman steepled her fingers against her temples and tried to massage away the tension headache that lingered there. "Faith is like any other muscle. You must exercise it if you want it to grow stronger." Bleakly, Ruth raised her eyes. I'm worn out, Stella. I barely have the energy to pry myself out of bed each morning. If it weren't for Stacy's cajoling, I'd likely hide in the closet until the world made sense again. I hid, Stella whispered. After they lowered my son's tiny, frail body into the cold ground, I withdrew into a shell. I walked and talked. My other children got their meals and a goodnight kiss. But my mind was fixated on the thought of Carl reaching out for me in that eternal darkness, that endless night, and I nearly drove myself mad with grief. I'm sorry. So sorry, Ruth tenderly consoled. Stella stood and pulled a framed portrait from the wall. The charcoal sketch captured the child's likeness, but the blank, unseeing eyes tugged at Ruth's soul. Were her doubts, fears, and frustrations blinding her to God's presence? Chapter 16. I miss you, Brownie. There's no Christmas without you.
Now, Angel, you know I'm mighty lonely without you too, but I don't want you to mix up those feelings with the truth. We have every reason in the world to celebrate the greatest gift we'll ever know. Ruth's eyes filled.
How can you say that when everything you've worked for is reduced to ash?
Pain clouded his reason, but there were two things Charlie knew without a doubt. First, life was full of trouble, and second, there wasn't a single thing in this world or the next that caught God off guard, and a sudden insight only added veracity to that belief. You're a sound sleeper, Ruth. What woke you that night?
Huh?
2 summers ago, when that big storm blew off Lake Superior, it sounded like a freight train bearing down on us, and you never budged. So I'm wondering what managed to wake you up from a deep sleep on the night of the fire. Stumped, Ruth tried to recall.
I think maybe I was dreaming about our first Christmas Eve together, and I wanted to snuggle in closer to you, like we did that first time in front of the fireplace.
A rumble of laughter filled Charlie's chest. That was indeed a night to remember. But as his chuckle died off, the man prompted. You think maybe the good Lord was trying to get your attention? Ruth harumphed.
With a naughty dream? Really, Charlie, I don't think...
Tickled by the scandalized note in his wife's voice, Charlie chortled even louder. I'm inclined to say he knows what it takes to wake you up, and desperate times call for desperate measures, he good-naturedly teased.
Oh, honestly.
The fire chief was pretty clear about his assessment of the situation, Ruth. Every single building was doused in accelerant, and those full cans of kerosene were left at random intervals to prompt a chain reaction. A few more minutes, and the house would have caught, Charlie gruffly commented, still terrified by the thought. Trembling, Ruth shakily dropped into a chair.
And the snow, it fell so fast and heavy.
A dream to wake you in time, and a blanket of protection straight from heaven. It sounds like someone was watching over us, Angel. And as angry as the whole situation makes me, I can't help but be thankful that I can still hear the sound of your voice this Christmas Eve.
It is a gift, isn't it? A precious, irreplaceable gift,
Ruth softly questioned. Hands trembling, Derek Finseth crumpled the single sheet of lined paper in one fist and wheezed out a stream of profanity that left him short of breath. The letter's redacted portions worried him more than his ex-girlfriend's assurance that his bail issue was solved. Picking up the included newspaper clipping from the floor, Derek cringed at the dramatic photo of fire crews battling multiple blazes at the Merry Hollow Tree Farm. Alarm slithered a chilling path down his spine. What had he done? Afterward. If you are new to the idea of God working in your life, then please allow me the privilege of sharing a simple blueprint. The ABCs of salvation outlines the path to a new life when you trust in God's guidance and ample provision. Admit that you are lost on your own,
and acknowledge the need for redemption and direction. Believe that Jesus died in your place and removed the spiritual death penalty from your life. Claim the free gift of eternal life by confessing your need, and state your desire to begin a personal relationship with God. Elaborate prayers are not what God requires. He just wants to hear your heart speak to Him as a well-loved child would with their father. Give Him all your cares, ask for His forgiveness, and accept the beautiful gift of new life, eternal life, found only in Jesus. If you've chosen to accept the gift of a new beginning with Jesus, I'd love to hear your story. And if there are questions that still plague your heart, please feel free to contact me via email at author@michelepollockdalton.com. That's Michelepollockdalton. This story, in all of its digital forms, will always remain free for you to share. Links can be found on my website at www.michelepollockdalton.com. As a new child of God, you'll want to find people who will nurture you and help you grow in your daily relationship with God. Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas, has a spectacular online ministry that will be a cherished resource as you move forward with your new life. Find them at www.sacornerstone.org. Other online ministries you may want to investigate can be found at www.wochurch.org, www.jdfarag.org, and www.harvest.org. God bless. This has been Spirit of Christmas, Good God, Hope for the Holiday Series, Book 4. Written by Michele Pollock Dalton. Narrated by Rick Barr. Copyright 2020 by Michele Pollock Dalton. Production copyright by Michele Pollock Dalton.